Picture this. A man with weathered hands clutches a faded military photo as the morning light filters through dusty blinds. His home feels emptier than it ever has. In the corner, a dog bed lies vacant, the collar still draped across it. James Calloway, a Marine veteran with 20 years of service, hasn't left his house in 3 days. The neighbors have noticed, especially Diana Brooks from across the street, who watches through parted curtains as another delivery driver leaves a package on his doorstep, knocks, and walks away without any response from inside. "Something's wrong with the military guy," she whispers into her phone. "He hasn't even been cleaning up his yard since that dog died. It's bringing down property values." She narrows her eyes at the growing collection of packages. Someone should do something about it. Little did she know, one particular package about to arrive would change everything for both of them. Let me take you back to where it all began. James Calloway moved into the Oak Hills community 5 years ago after retiring from the Marines. The neighborhood had been exactly what he was looking for. Quiet streets lined with mature trees, houses with character, and enough space between properties that he could breathe. Most importantly, it was a fresh start, somewhere his nightmares wouldn't follow. At least that's what he'd hoped. The neighbors quickly came to know James as the guy who kept to himself but would always help when needed. He fixed Mrs. Henderson's fence after a storm, taught the Johnson kids how to build birdhouses, and volunteered to coordinate the neighborhood watch without being asked. His lawn was impeccable, not a blade of grass out of place. Some neighbors joked that you could bounce a quarter off his perfectly made bed through the window if his blinds were ever open at the right angle. The one thing everyone knew about James was his devotion to Max, his German Shepherd therapy dog. Max wasn't just a pet, he was James's lifeline. The dog had been specially trained to recognize when James was having a panic attack or slipping into a depressive episode. Max would place his head on James's lap, applying gentle pressure until his breathing steadied. On particularly bad nights, Max would wake James from nightmares by pulling the covers off and licking his face until the images of fallen comrades faded back into memory. "Max saved my life more than once," James once told Tom Rivera, the retired firefighter next door, during a rare moment of openness as they shared beers on a warm summer evening. "Some of us come back with wounds you can't see. Max knows exactly where they are, though." James and Max were a fixture in the neighborhood. The tall, straight-backed veteran and his dignified companion walking precisely at 700 and 1700 hours every day, rain or shine. Neighbors set their watches by them. Children asked to pet Max, and James always ensured these interactions were positive, teaching kids the proper way to approach a working dog. Diana Brooks moved into the house across from James 8 months ago. From her home office window, she had a clear view of his front yard and driveway. The first time she saw him was during her video call with the Homeowners Association board, where she'd volunteered to be secretary before even unpacking her moving boxes. "That's my view," she said, turning her laptop to show the board members James meticulously edging his lawn while Max watched attentively from the shade. "At least someone on this street understands proper maintenance standards." The first encounter between James and Diana came 3 weeks after she moved in. James was washing his modest truck in the driveway when Diana approached, clipboard in hand and a practiced smile on her face. "Good morning. I'm Diana Brooks, HOA secretary." She extended a manicured hand, which James dried his own before shaking. Max sat at attention beside him. "I'm conducting our seasonal compliance review. I notice your mailbox is the older model. We updated the approved design last year." James glanced at his perfectly functional black mailbox. "Ma'am, I wasn't aware of any change. No one's mentioned it." Diana's smile tightened at the corners. "Well, you received the email with the updated guidelines. All boxes need to be the Brunswick model in forest green by the end of the month. It's about neighborhood aesthetic cohesion. I'll look into it," James replied evenly, though he rarely checked the HOA emails that seemed to multiply daily. Diana's gaze shifted to Max. "And I should remind you that all dogs must be leashed at all times in front of yards. Max is leashed when required, by local ordinance. In my own yard, he stays by my side without command." As if to demonstrate, Max hadn't moved an inch despite Diana's unfamiliar presence. Diana's smile vanished completely. "Rules are rules, Mr. Calloway. They apply to everyone, even veterans." She said the last word with an odd inflection that James couldn't quite place. "We'll be following up on these compliance matters." As she walked away, she called over her shoulder, "And do remind your dog not to bark at night. Some of us work from home and need our sleep." James frowned slightly. Max was perhaps the quietest dog in the neighborhood, trained specifically not to bark except in particular circumstances. He'd never received a complaint before. "Seems we have a situation brewing, buddy," he murmured to Max, who looked up with intelligent eyes that seemed to understand far more than most humans James had known. Over the next few months, James found himself increasingly in Diana's crosshairs. First came official notices about his mailbox, which he eventually replaced despite finding nothing in the HOA documents requiring the specific model Diana had mentioned. Then came complaints about the American flag he'd hung. Apparently, it was 2 inches larger than regulation. His garbage cans, though never left out beyond collection day, were supposedly visible from the street at the wrong angle. The bird feeder in his backyard was attracting nuisance wildlife. Each time James addressed the issues with military precision and minimal fuss. He shortened the flagpole, moved the garbage cans to the side yard, and relocated the bird feeder deeper into his property. "Choose your battles," he told Max during their evening walks. The dog would tilt his head as if considering this wisdom. Tom Rivera noticed the pattern. "You know she's targeting you specifically, right?" he said one evening over the fence separating their yards. "Johnson's boat has been parked in his driveway for 3 months, and she hasn't said a word." James shrugged. "It's easier to comply than fight." "That's not the Marine I know," Tom replied with a knowing look. "Combat taught me to save my energy for battles that matter," James said quietly, scratching Max behind the ears. The situation escalated after the neighborhood's summer picnic. James had reluctantly attended with Max, who was, as always, impeccably behaved and wearing his service vest. Several neighbors' children had gathered around the dog, with James carefully supervising their interactions. Diana approached the group, her mouth set in a thin line. "Animals aren't permitted at community food events," she announced loudly enough for nearby conversations to halt. James kept his voice even. "Max is a certified service animal, Ms. Brooks. Federal law permits his presence in all public spaces." "This is a private community event," Diana insisted, "and several members have expressed concerns about allergies." James looked around at the neighbors, many of whom appeared embarrassed by Diana's confrontation. No one stepped forward to confirm these alleged complaints. "If anyone has concerns, they're welcome to speak with me directly," James offered. "Max is hypoallergenic and regularly groomed." Diana's face flushed. "As HOA secretary, I speak for the community, and I'm telling you the dog needs to go." Before James could respond, Tom stepped in. "Actually, Diana, as HOA president, I should remind you that our bylaws specifically exempt service animals from any pet restrictions." Tom had been president for 5 years, respected for his fairness and dislike of unnecessary rules. Diana's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that," she muttered, before walking away stiffly. The following week, James found an anonymous note in his mailbox. "Not all wounds are visible, but some people don't deserve special treatment. Control your animal or else." He crumpled it immediately, but something about the threatened tone lingered uncomfortably. That night, he double-checked the locks on all his doors and windows before going to bed. Over the next several weeks, Diana's campaign intensified. She began photographing James and Max during their walks, documenting what she claimed were violations. Max stepping on a neighbor's edge of lawn, James not picking up waste, though he always carried multiple bags and was meticulous about cleanup. She submitted formal complaints to the HOA about aggressive animal behavior, when Max simply wagged his tail at passing neighbors. James started carrying a small camera during walks to document Max's actual behavior. He kept a detailed log of incidents, times, and witnesses. Tom and several other neighbors began to do the same, concerned by the increasingly hostile environment. She submitted a petition to ban service animals from common areas, Tom informed James one evening. "Got 3 signatures out of 86 houses. I've started a counter-petition supporting you and Max. Already have 30 signatures." James nodded gratefully. "I appreciate that, but I don't want to divide the neighborhood." "You're not dividing anything." "She is," Tom insisted. The situation reached a breaking point when James returned from grocery shopping to find animal control officers at his house. Diana stood nearby, arms crossed triumphantly. "We received a report of an aggressive dog at this address," the female officer explained apologetically. "Multiple complaints, apparently." Max sat calmly at James's side, the picture of a well-trained service animal. James provided all of Max's documentation, vaccination records, service certification, training certificate. The officers quickly determined there was no issue. As they prepared to leave, the male officer pulled James aside. "Look, we know when we're being used to harass someone. This isn't the first time we've been called to this neighborhood recently. Thank you for understanding," James said quietly. As the animal control van pulled away, Diana approached. "This isn't over. That dog is a menace, and everyone knows it." For the first time, James felt genuine anger rising in his chest. "Ms. Brooks, I've complied with every reasonable request. I've replaced my mailbox, moved my bird feeder, and adjusted my flag. I've documented Max's behavior and kept him leashed in public spaces despite his service animal exemptions. What exactly is your issue with me or my dog? Diana's voice dropped to a near whisper. People like you think your service gives you special privileges. The rules apply to everyone. If you can't handle living in a civilized community, maybe you should move somewhere else. She glanced contemptuously at Max. And take your emotional support prop with you. Something in James went very still. In 20 years of military service and 5 years of struggling with PTSD, he had never felt so coldly furious. But his voice, when he spoke, was calm. Ms. Brooks, I would strongly advise you to walk away now. She smirked and turned to leave, calling over her shoulder, better keep that mutt on a tight leash. That evening, James sat on his back porch with Max's head in his lap, running through breathing exercises his therapist had taught him. His phone buzzed with a text from Tom. Security camera footage from my driveway shows her entering your backyard. Yesterday, when you were at VA appointment, what do you want to do? James stared at the message for a long time. There were proper channels for handling trespassing, police reports, restraining orders, HOA complaints. But something told him Diana would find ways to work around official measures. She seemed determined to make his life unbearable enough that he would leave. After 2 decades in military intelligence, James had developed a particular set of skills for dealing with persistent opponents. Skills he had deliberately packed away upon retirement. Now he pulled out his laptop and began researching Diana Brooks more thoroughly than a simple Google search. Property records, court filings, business registrations, social media accounts. A picture began to emerge of someone who had left a trail of similar conflicts in 3 previous communities. For the next week, James set up discreet security cameras around his property. He installed motion detectors that would alert his phone. He spoke with neighbors who had similar experiences with Diana and gathered statements. He documented everything, meticulously, building a case that would be irrefutable. During this time, Max seemed to sense his growing resolve. The dog stayed closer than usual, as if lending his strength to James's renewed purpose. Their morning walks took on a sharper pace, their evening routines more purposeful. For the first time in years, James felt himself fully engaging with a mission, his mind clear and focused. Then came the morning that changed everything. James woke to find Max struggling to stand, his breathing labored. Panicked, he rushed the dog to the emergency vet where the diagnosis was swift and devastating. A twisted stomach, common in larger breeds. Emergency surgery was required. James paced the waiting room for hours, constantly checking his phone for updates. When the vet finally emerged, her expression told him everything before she spoke a word. I'm so sorry, Mr. Calloway. We did everything we could, but there were complications. Max's heart couldn't take the strain. The world seemed to narrow to a pinpoint. James heard himself asking practical questions, making arrangements, signing forms. But inside, a void was opening that threatened to swallow him whole. He drove home in silence, Max's collar clutched in one hand. As he pulled into his driveway, he saw Diana standing on her porch, watching him with undisguised curiosity. When she noticed him looking, she quickly disappeared inside. The next 3 days passed in a fog. James didn't leave the house. He didn't answer the door when neighbors brought food. He sat in his silent home, where every corner held memories of Max. The worn spot on the couch, the toys in their basket, the leash hanging by the door. On the morning of the 4th day, he forced himself to shower and dress in clean clothes. Tom had texted that he would come by to check on him, and James couldn't face his friend looking like he'd completely fallen apart, even if that's exactly how he felt. As he opened his front door to collect his mail, he noticed a package that hadn't been there the previous evening. It was a plain brown box with no shipping label, just his name written in block letters. Cautiously, he brought it inside and placed it on the kitchen table, examining it from all angles before carefully opening it. Inside was a small wooden box, beautifully crafted from polished oak. A note lay on top, for James Calloway, who understands the true meaning of loyalty. With trembling hands, he opened the wooden box to find a puppy collar, brand new, with a name tag that read, Scout. Beneath it was a printed certificate for a German Shepherd puppy from a service dog training program, with a note indicating the puppy had already completed its initial training phase. And at the bottom of the box, a photograph of a German Shepherd puppy with intelligent eyes that seemed to look directly into his soul. James felt something crack in his chest. Not another breaking, but perhaps the first sign of eventual healing. He turned over the certificate and found another note. Max, saved you. Now someone else needs saving. Appointment scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. It was signed by his VA therapist and the director of the service dog program. For the first time in days, James felt a flicker of something beyond grief. He picked up his phone to call his therapist when a notification appeared. Motion detected in his backyard. He switched to the security camera app to see Diana Brooks carefully making her way toward his garden shed, a small container in her hand. In that moment, something crystallized in James's mind. Diana's campaign against him and Max had been relentless, but he had been fighting defensively. Now, with Max gone and a new purpose taking shape, perhaps it was time for a different approach. He watched the screen as Diana poured something from her container around his prize rose bushes, plants that had been part of his therapy, each one named after a fallen comrade. His horticultural therapy group at the VA would recognize the calculated cruelty of this act. James set down the puppy collar and picked up his phone instead. The evidence had been gathering for months: the trespassing, the false reports, the targeted harassment. Now he had her on camera committing property damage. But direct confrontation wasn't his style, and simple revenge wouldn't honor Max's memory. What happened next unfolded with military precision. James made 3 phone calls. The first to Tom, sharing the security footage and asking for a specific kind of help. The second to his lawyer, who had been holding a completed file on Diana's activities for just this moment. The third to the service dog program, confirming he would be there tomorrow to meet Scout. 3 days later, Diana Brooks received an official-looking envelope in her mailbox. Inside was a notice of a special HOA meeting to address community harmony and ethical governance. Attached was a dossier containing printouts of her social media posts mocking veterans with PTSD, documentation of her trespassing and property damage from multiple security cameras, statements from neighbors about her pattern of targeted harassment, and records from her previous communities showing similar behavior that had resulted in her being asked to resign from those HOA positions. The final page was a simple letter signed by 28 neighbors, including several veterans and first responders. This neighborhood was built on respect and mutual support. We all agree to reasonable rules, but we do not agree to targeted harassment or discrimination. We believe in second chances, but those must be earned through genuine change. Diana arrived at the community center for the special meeting to find nearly every homeowner in attendance. Tom Rivera stood at the podium with James quietly seated nearby. As the evidence was presented calmly and methodically, Diana's face cycled through indignation, alarm, and finally a dawning recognition that she had severely miscalculated. "This isn't a trial," Tom assured the room. "We're here to find a path forward. Ms. Brooks has valuable organizational skills that could benefit our community if applied positively. But first, we need acknowledgement and change." When Diana's turn to speak came, she had clearly prepared a defense about enforcing standards and property values. But facing a room full of neighbors united in their disappointment, her rehearsed speech faltered. For perhaps the first time, she saw herself through their eyes, not as a defender of community standards, but as someone whose behavior had caused genuine harm. "I may have been overzealous in my approach," she finally admitted. "I believed I was acting in the community's best interests." From his seat, James spoke for the first time. "We all want a good community to live in. That starts with respecting each other's humanity." The meeting ended with Diana agreeing to step down as HOA secretary and to participate in the community's restorative justice program, facilitated by a retired judge who lived on the north end of the neighborhood. She would help replant James's damaged rose bushes and contribute community service hours to the local VA hospital's grounds maintenance program. As neighbors filed out of the meeting, many stopped to speak with James, expressing condolences about Max and offering help with anything he might need. Diana lingered until the room had nearly emptied before approaching him. I'm sorry about your dog," she said stiffly. James studied her face, looking for sincerity. "His name was Max," he said quietly, "and he saved my life more than once." After a moment, Diana nodded. "I never had a pet. I didn't understand." "Maybe that can change," James suggested, not unkindly. "The shelter always needs volunteers." The next morning, James drove to the service dog training center. As he walked in, his heart pounding with a mixture of grief and anticipation, a German shepherd puppy with bright, intelligent eyes bounded toward him, training vest slightly too big for his growing frame. "This is Scout," the trainer said. "He's young, but he's shown remarkable aptitude. He's going to need someone patient to help him reach his potential." As Scout sniffed James's outstretched hand, then leaned trustingly against his leg, James felt something shift inside him, not an ending to his grief over Max, but the beginning of something new alongside it. 1 year later, the Oak Hills community gathered for their annual summer picnic. James arrived with Scout, now grown into his training vest, and walking with the dignified purpose that reminded many neighbors of Max. The difference was in James himself. He smiled more, engaged in conversations, and had even started a gardening club that attracted veterans and civilians alike. Diana Brooks was there too, quieter than before, but actively participating. She had found her niche managing the community's new beautification committee, where her attention to detail was appreciated rather than resented. She and James maintained a cordial distance, bound by mutual respect if not friendship. The rose bushes in James's garden had not only recovered, but flourished, with cuttings now growing in several neighbors' yards as a living memorial to fallen service members. Beside them, a new section had begun, Scout's Garden, filled with hardy plants that could withstand an enthusiastic dog's occasional missteps. As the community sat down to share their meal, Tom raised his glass in a toast, to neighbors who become friends, to second chances, and to healing what's broken, even when those breaks aren't visible to the eye. Later, as James and Scout walked home in the fading evening light, they passed Diana working in her front garden. She nodded in acknowledgement, and James returned the gesture. They had found, if not friendship, then at least peaceful coexistence. That night, as Scout settled into his bed, positioned exactly where Max's had been, James looked at the framed photograph on his mantel. Max's collar was displayed alongside a photo of them together, a memorial to a partnership that had saved him when he needed it most. Beside it now stood a new frame with a growing collection of photos. Scout's milestones, training achievements, and goofy puppy moments. Different souls, different journeys, same purpose. Sometimes healing arrives in unexpected packages. Have you ever had a mysterious package change your life, or witnessed a neighborhood conflict transform into something unexpected? Share your stories in the comments below. And if you know someone who's struggling with loss or needs support, remember that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply be present. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of transformation and second chances. Until next time, remember that healing isn't always about forgetting what was lost. Sometimes it's about making room for what comes next.